ESPN has proposed 11 trade ideas across the National Football League in terms of, just some possible moves that could be made this offseason, and the Jaguars were involved in two of them. And on today's show, we're going to be discussing what those two moves were and how I feel they would go for the Jaguars and how Jaguars fans should feel about it. Welcome into Jags Now. My name is Cullen Brown, and I am your host. Before we get into today's video, guys, the support has been unreal. We have just crossed over 1,400 subscribers. Thank you guys so much. Another free way you can help support the channel is by hitting that like button. The most likes we've ever received on a video was 234, which is absolutely crazy to think about. On today's video, can we top that? Can we break our own record? Can we get 250 likes? It'd be greatly appreciated. It would show my bosses here at Chat Sports that you guys like the videos that we're putting out. Therefore, it's a great free way to help support the channel. Please hit that like button on today's show. Getting into the first trade idea that Bill Barnwell kind of proposed for the Jaguars, and it goes as follows. The Jaguars received a 2026 fifth-round pick in exchange for Walker Little and a 2027 seventh-round pick. Now, I'm going to kind of read you with both these trades. I'm just going to read you Bill Barnwell's kind of thought process, his kind of, reasoning behind it, and then I'm going to give my take. So here's what Bill Barnwell had to say on this trade. It doesn't seem like Little is in Jacksonville's plans. If Van Lanen, talking about Cole Van Lanen, is at left tackle, that would leave Robert Hainsey at center, Anton Harrison at right tackle, and Patrick McCarry at one of the guard spots. The Jags could bump Little inside to replace Ezra Cleveland, who's in the final year of his deal. To be honest, I don't think it would be Ezra Cleveland that he'd be replacing, but irregardless. But third-round pick Wyatt Milam is likely to have the inside path to that role. Keeping Little as a swing tackle and utility lineman is also an option, but paying $12 million in 2026 for that privilege doesn't seem like the best use of Jacksonville's cash next season. And if it wasn't apparent already, I think Walker Little's starting days in Jacksonville are over. It just seems like the Jaguars are moving in a new direction, given his, brief injury history, but also just his kind of, penalty-riddled play, his kind of up-and-down play, if we're being honest. And when you're looking at the Jaguars' depth chart, I don't know really where he would really compete outside of maybe right guard with Patrick McCarry, who kind of had an up-and-down season for Jacksonville in his first year in Duval County. But Ezra Cleveland, I thought, was really good. He was the better of the two guards, in my opinion. Robert Hainsey, you're obviously not replacing him at center. And I think, as we previously talked about, Van Lanen and Harrison are your kind of long-term options there at offensive tackle. And Barnwell said it himself. $12 million is way too much for a swing tackle or a utility offensive lineman, whatever title you want to use for Walker Little. And I just think that, one way or another, either that cap hit's going to come down in terms of, do they rework his deal? Do they cut him? Do they trade him? Well, I went inside the trade numbers into some potential moves for Walker Little in terms of, okay, if he does get traded, what would it look like? If it's pre-June 1st, he'd have a 7.2, not only dead cap, but you'd save $7.2 million if you're Jacksonville, so kind of a net, zero there. If it's a post-June 1st, it's about $2.5 million dead cap, but $11.9 million in savings. And I think that Cleveland certainly has some holes on their offensive line. Later, Barnwell said in the article that Cleveland has holes everywhere on their offensive line, so Walker Little could be a potential option. And if Little is traded, swing tackle will be a priority for the Jaguars because as we talked about on the offensive line depth chart, I think your offensive line is set in terms of the starters. I really like Jonah Monheim as a backup center for Robert Hainsey if he needs to fill in at a pinch. And as previously mentioned by Barnwell as well, Wyatt Milam, I think, could be this team's future starting left guard. I really liked him coming out of West Virginia. I think he's got a lot of transitional skills that can, play in the National Football League. So I just don't know if Walker Little fits in this team's plans going forward. We'll see ultimately what Jacksonville decides to do, but I thought overall it's fair compensation. We had talked about the trade compensation in terms of being a late-round pick swap, and that's ultimately what I think Jacksonville would get in a hypothetical trade. But I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Will the Jaguars trade Walker Little? Type T for trade or type K for keep? I think it's most likely he's going to get traded, if not cut at this point. I just don't see a world where he is on the roster for 2026. But if the Jaguars do make a trade, don't miss a thing. We'll make a video if the Jaguars make any move, whether it's a trade, a signing, a cut, whatever the case may be. We've got you covered here at Jags Now. Hit that subscribe button because whenever Jags news, rumors, what have you breaks, we've got you covered here on the channel. Subscribe for more Jaguars videos. Getting into the second trade idea per ESPN. This one is a little more star-studded, I guess you could call it that. The Jaguars in this trade receive Keon Coleman and a 2026 first-round pick, number 26 overall in this year's draft, in exchange for Brian Thomas Jr. and a 2026 fifth-round pick. Let's turn over to Bill Barnwell. He says the following. The Jags also don't have their first-round pick in 2026 after trading it to the Browns as a part of the Travis Hunter deal, leaving Gladstone with limited draft capital. Thomas would be their most realistic way to get that missing first-rounder back. Getting the pick back for just the sake of it doesn't mean much. But if the Jags don't see Thomas as a focal point of their offense, the best time to make a move would be now. Just right off the bat, I'm not ready to pivot off Brian Thomas Jr. I know that he had a down year in terms of his standards last season. And look, he came into the National Football League as a rookie, had over 1,000 yards, was lighting the league on fire with Mac Jones, of all people, and really just, creating a debate. Was he necessarily the best wide receiver in the Jaguars receiving room? And was he the best, not only in the Jaguars receiving room, but also was he the best draft pick in that 2024 draft? And he followed it up with a sophomore campaign that was just ugly, if we're being honest. 700 receiving yards, still averaged 14 yards per catch, but 2 touchdowns to 8 drops. Those are numbers that you don't love to see. And then, just to show the Keon Coleman portion of it, I mean, he has just been a flop out of the University of Florida State ever since he entered the league. I mean, Brandon Beane had the quote necessarily that they weren't all on the same page in Buffalo in terms of drafting him. His value's at an all-time low, so this was pretty much a throw-in, basically worth a day 3 pick at this point. I don't know if he has an NFL future. And so I'm not really interested in Keon Coleman. When you look at the Jaguars wide receiver depth chart, though, this is where it gets interesting. You have Parker Washington, you have Jacoby Myers, Brian Thomas Jr., Travis Hunter. Now, as previously reported by Yahoo Sports, the Jaguars, or actually by Cameron Wolf, this was aggregated by Yahoo Sports a couple days ago, the Jaguars plan to use Travis Hunter as a full-time cornerback and a part-time wide receiver for 2026. Now, we did a full breakdown on our last video that went out last night, so make sure you guys go check that one out. But I'm really interested to see who emerges as wide receiver 1 for the Jaguars. I think that Jacoby Myers is clearly the one with the most veteran, been in the league the longest, knows what it takes to be a truly good wide receiver in this league. So I think he's a safe bet. Parker Washington, on the other hand, that really last month of the year and even that playoff game against the Buffalo Bills, he gives you a different element that in terms of explosiveness and just pure playmaking ability that this Jaguars offense, when he wasn't in the lineup, definitely felt. And then you've got Brian Thomas Jr., who, again, showed those great flashes as a rookie and really showed that he could be the potential future star of this team. Didn't follow it up in the second year under first-year head coach at the time, Liam Cohen. Does that mean Brian Thomas Jr. shouldn't be in consideration for the wide receiver 1? I don't think so. I mean, Liam Cohen said it himself. He is going to be a factor for this team moving forward, and I'm not ruling out the possibility that he could end up as a wide receiver 1 after another year in Cohen's system. I think he's got all the ability to be the wide receiver 1 in Jacksonville. So I'm not really willing to pivot off of Brian Thomas Jr. yet. I mean, I get that it's a first-round pick. That being said, if with Travis Hunter kind of committing more to the defensive side of the ball, I mean, your wide receiver room, if you moved him away, again, in that hypothetical trade, would be Jacoby Myers, Parker Washington, who I like as 2 receivers, and then Keon Coleman, and maybe Tim Patrick if you bring him back. That's not really moving the needle for me, especially for a team that's coming off a 13-win season and winning the AFC South. But I'll ask you guys, should the Jaguars trade Brian Thomas Jr.? Type Y for yes, type N for no. I'm typing my N for no's. I think, again, didn't have a great year last year. It's way too early to pivot off of him, in my opinion. And look, I'm really interested to see what this Jaguars receiving room looks like in the future. I think it's a lot of excitement, along with how, Britton Strange and everybody's going to look in the passing game for, Trevor Lawrence and Liam Cohen in this offense. But I think Brian Thomas Jr. is going to have a factor in it. We'll see ultimately how things land. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of Jags Now presented by Chat Sports. Again, if you guys like these videos, hit that like button. We greatly appreciate all the support. Hit that subscribe button to make sure you guys stay in the loop. And as always, Jags fans, Duval. We'll see you next time.